Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective. Good morning, listeners. It's Saturday. We've been allowed out of lockdown and we have a very special guest for you today, but I won't announce who that is just at the moment. We're dedicating this show to Morid Barghouti, a very famous Palestinian intellectual, author, poet, who passed away sadly in Palestine this past week. I'm going to read just a very small piece of one of his poems, and it goes like this. The homeland does not leave the body until the last moment, the moment of death. The fish, even in the fisherman's net, still carries the smell of the sea. That's Morid Barghouti, a Palestinian hero. He died in Palestine, aged 76. He'll be sadly missed. And to talk about Morid Barghouti's legacy, his life, his work, joining us is our dear friend and the founder of the show, Mr. Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi. Good morning, Yusuf.
Good morning, Nasser. Good morning to our dear listeners. Thank you so much. Before I begin my answer, I want to say thank you for keeping the show alive all the past year, not to mention that it has been a very challenging year. So thank you, Nasser and Robert.
Pleasure. Now, Yusuf, Morid, he lived a life like many Palestinians. He was born before the state of Israel. One of his challenges I read along the journey when he went to America, they said, where are you from? And he tried to say Palestine. They said, there's no such thing. You must be from Israel. He said, well, when I was born, there was no such thing as Israel. So I'm Palestinian.
Morid al-Barghouti was born in July 44, 4 years before the so-called Israel. Morid, I guess, represents the generation that I call the children of Nakba, those who became children, those who became stateless when they were still unable to learn how to walk or read or write or talk. And then I think this generation, not just that they were deprived from their homeland along with their families, they became deprived from their childhood. I bet if you speak with anyone who was born in late 30s onward, and then try and ask them about their first toy or anything or game, and they will think for long before they answer you until you hear something like, we had to make it ourselves. Like, for example, the football made out of socks or something like that. So we're talking about a generation that was stripped not just from homeland, but also from their childhood because of the Nakba. And
let me share a story to that, because interestingly, somebody told me, a Nakba child, well into his 80s now, told me, he said, one thing he was never able to do with his children was to take them to his primary school or to his high school. Yep. Or to say, this is where this is the shop I used to go to. Because he was a Palestinian and exiled, he went from Palestine to Jordan to Syria to Egypt to Australia. His travels and his life, his existence knows no center point. Whereas today, I was born in Australia to a refugee Palestinian, but I can take my children to the park and show them, this is where I play, this is where I chipped my tooth, this is where I kicked my first goal. And, I can take them through my life's journey. This is denied the refugee. This is denied the Palestinian. It was denied to Morid.
Correct. Well, this is a perfect example, Nasser. You mentioned about something very simple and often unthought of, but it is indicative of layers and layers of deprivation that only Palestinians understand and have gone through. And when I say only, I don't want to belittle the experiences of other stateless refugees, but we're talking about prolonged refugee. On Earth, in modern history, we are the biggest and the largest group of refugee population. And when you deny a population of currently 14 million statehood or homeland for 72 years, you will be amazed to find out the layers and layers of suffering. And you mentioned one example of not able to take them to my childhood or primary school. But I guess the more painful one will be not able to take or not able to pay respect at the grave of your father and the grave of your grandfather. So, for example, the grandmother from my mother's side, Abdul Karim, who was 25 on Nakba, he could not go to Safad to pray at the grave of his father. And because of what happened to Yarmouk, now his children, including my mother and myself and my other maternal uncles, cannot go to his grave in Yarmouk because of the ugly war in Syria. So 3 generations denied one simple, often unnoticed aspect of human rights. And I say this with difficulty because these things are very painful. So if we want to go back to Morid, Morid, like the children of Nakba, took his share from the suffering of his people. And I watched one of his most recent interviews he gave, I think 2 years ago, and he was humbled to say, despite all the suffering that we might shed some light on, that we didn't pay a heavy price like the rest and the majority of Palestinians, because our suffering was social. He was unable to unite with his Egyptian wife and his only son because of political region in the neighboring countries. And what is this? I'm quoting him. What is this compared to losing a life or losing freedom or losing or being injured, and the list goes on. So he is not the type of victim who is centered around his victimhood. I want to talk about Deir Ghassani. Deir Ghassani is a twin village to Beit Rima, my home village. And Deir Ghassani and Beit Rima share schools, primary, intermediary, and secondary. They share mosques, they share social gatherings, social clubs, they share hospitals, or what we call mustawsaf or sub-hospital, yani. So there, we know Deir Ghassani, there is no one single Rimawi. I mean, myself is not included because I am a refugee. I have not been to Palestine yet. But in Palestine, Deir Ghassani and Beit Rima are twin cities. So the name even dates back to the Ghassanids. The Ghassanids are the pre-Islamic Arabs who the Ghassasina or the Ghassanid dynasty. And before the Ghassanids, it has a Canaanite name. So we're talking about a village that dates back in history to at least 3,000 years and even more of continued inhabited life in this village. So Deir Ghassani is known in the Palestinian national calendar of a famous meeting that took place in 1938 between groups of Palestinian resistance after Britain and Jewish gangs tried to crush them. In that meeting, they were trying to resolve some of the problems that, or some of the internal tensions. And unfortunately, the British were able to find out about this meeting and they targeted it. And 30 shaheeds, 30 martyrs were killed in Deir Ghassani. And this is 38. This is 8 years before Morid was born. So he was born into the stories of resistance. He was born into the stories of farmers, of steadfastness. And then like the rest of the children of Nakba, when they grew up on the hope of return to the lost 78% of Palestine, and grew up on looking to, for example, the Algerian model after the independence war in 1962, and before that 6 years. So they were hopeful that they will return. He himself was not a refugee of 48, but he spoke about it in his late novel, I Saw Ramallah, which we might talk about down this episode. But I want to say that, like the rest of the children of Nakba, they were denied of there were very little opportunities given to them in terms of education and employment. So his only chance of education was in Egypt of Jamal Abdel Nasser, and that was the beginning of another chapter in his life.
Now, February is subscriber month, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you subscribe. 3CR is so very important for not only Palestinian voices, but for other disadvantaged and marginalized voices, from our Indigenous brothers and sisters to LGBTQI community. We really need 3CR. So call into 3CR, give your credit card details over the phone, or you can just go to 3cr.org.au, subscribe, become a member. We're a community-owned radio station. Everybody in here is a volunteer. There's so very few paid staff. Without your support, 3CR can't be on the air, and you won't be able to hear such great shows like Palestine Remembered, and to hear Yusuf's beautiful voice. Back to you.
Thank you, Nasser. Thank you, Habibi. I guess the most important chapter of Morid's life was when he was 20-something year old. His university student. Back then it was the Egypt of Jamal Abdel Nasser of the 60s. And Jamal Abdel Nasser, now when we look back to Egypt of the 60s, we understand that there was the 67 war, but also there was a project of Pan-Arabism. Also there was a project of Renaissance and Nahda. There was the Sadd al-Ali of the southern part of Egypt, building the water dam, and also hundreds or maybe thousands of factories. So there was a vision, and he witnessed that. And during that time, he got to meet the love of his life and the future wife and the future mother of his only son, Radwa Ashur. If you allow me, Nasser, I want to pause the story of Morid for a few seconds and to talk about Radwa.
Oh no, we definitely need to pay her due. Yes, absolutely.
Radwa was an Egyptian novelist. Sadly, we lost her a few years before Morid. She was a novelist. She was a lecturer of comparative literature at the University of Cairo. And I was fortunate enough to have known one of her students. I was on the phone with him a few minutes before this interview because I wanted an inside story, somebody who knows the family. And he said, look, Yusuf, Radwa was a type of people who touches anything that becomes green. Radwa is filled with love and giving heart. And she was the one who introduced the Egyptian students to Edward Said and to his friend Noam Chomsky. And she was the one, beyond the curriculum, of course, she was the one that planted the seed of Palestine in the heart of every Egyptian student, including the person who told me that. So I'm quoting him. And she, of course, not just because of Morid. Of course, Morid played a role in her love of Palestine, but she was born to be a real Arab, not just the type of, so-called official Arab representatives these days, that we started to forget what it was actually like to be an Arab. She was the type of Arab who will stand up against the oppression of every Arab, especially the Palestinians. And she was also a knowledgeable person, a novelist, and a person of literature. And you can imagine what could be or the life between Morid and Radwa. Of course, for example, I can just mention one of her epic novels, Thulathiyat Ghornata, And she spoke about 100 years after the loss of Granada, the last Arab town and city in Andalusia in 1491, in an epic series of novels. But more importantly, she spoke about Tantura village of Palestine. And Tantura is the sea village near Haifa, from which you probably know Muayyad and Usama and Kamal family. Tantura is known in Palestinian calendar because there was a massacre 2 days after it fell, where the Zionists basically killed every male above the age of maybe 13 in front of their own families. So she spoke about the life of Ruqayya, the Tanturiya girl, and of course she named the novel At-Tanturiya, a woman from Tantura. And she, according to one of the Kuwaiti critiques of Tanturiya, he said that Radwa was able to make me have the same emotions that this little girl Ruqayya had before Nakba, during the fall of Tantura, and after the exile. So she was just magical. She had this magical pen, was able to portray without exaggeration, without victimhood, the real picture of the people of Tantura and hence the people of Palestine. So we need to acknowledge, we need to pay respect and recognize the legacy of the late wife of Morid Radwa Ashur.
Yeah, Ali Yarhamah. God rest her soul. And their son, though, Tamim, he's a poet as well.
Correct. Tamim is one of the most well-known Palestinian poets currently. He was born in late 70s, and you can imagine the life in late 70s for a Palestinian Egyptian family in Cairo, especially in time of Camp David and Sadat, especially when both parents are outspoken in criticism of Camp David. So this is the beginning of the suffering of the family. Egypt kicked out the Egyptian authorities. Anwar Sadat personally kicked out Munir and denied him entry of Egypt. So he was prevented from seeing his own family for 7 years. For 7 years, he was unable to even see them, and they were unable to travel outside Egypt. And during the Mubarak time, even when they lifted the, the ban of entry, they made it nearly impossible to get the permit. So he was, for the following 9 years, visiting Egypt with very heavy restrictions. So this is the type of price when you are an Egyptian supporter of Palestine, when you are married to also a Palestinian intellect who is outspoken against not just Egypt, not because it's an Egyptian authority, but it's because of something that's related to his homeland, Palestine, Camp David. So Tamim grew up in this environment without a father, or with an absent father. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, they both were able to plant the seed of Palestine and literature in him. And he is now one of the most famous young Palestinian poets, especially after winning one of the most widely televised poetry contests 10 years ago in a poem on Jerusalem.
He co-authored a bit of that book with his father, Isa Ramallah. He's a very accomplished young man. Now, Yusuf, we know how staunch Morid was with respect to his criticism of the Arab world. He also had a bit of a criticism of the genre of resistance poetry.
Correct, Nasser. Let me first introduce the term Adab al-Muqawama. Adab al-Muqawama is the Arabic term that means the literature of resistance. And this was used post-1967. To imagine the Arab world before 67, Palestine was not the business of Palestinians. It was the job of either Egyptians or the Syrians or the Iraqis, or like they were the message we used to get before 65, the birth of the Palestinian revolution, and definitely before 67, the major defeat, was you sit down and watch us liberate Palestine. And therefore, the literature on Palestine was often ignored. And all of a sudden, people like Mahmoud Darwish were born, not just born physically, like as giants in literature. People like Samih al-Qasim, people like Emil Habibi, the Palestinian novelist from Haifa. And these were all in 48 areas. And people like Tawfiq Zayyad, the one who wrote أناديكم أشد على أياديكم. So the elites in the Arab world didn't know how to deal with this phenomenon, and they, out of solidarity, started referring to it as the literature of or adab al-muqawma, of resistance. And of course, I forgot maybe one of the most important ones, Ghassan Kanafani, in novel. So Morid does not like these stereotypes, and he says there's no such thing called adab al-muqawma. There was the literature of Palestinians that started before. What we know starts during the Ottoman and during the World War I, and then the British Mandate, and then the early creation of Israel, and then the Nakba, and so on and so forth. And to limit it into and reduce it into only one small box of adab al-muqawma is doing injustice to it. So I guess this is an example of his critical way of thinking. Morid al-Barghouti was a type of intellectual who is more like French elite as opposed to German opposition. And I say this is the analogy created by Mahmoud Darwish. He said, the opposition or the elite or the intellectuals in Germany, they were opposing the system from within. So they accept opposition and they express their criticism from within, but they are part of the system. And that's like something similar to like Mahmoud Darwish. On the other hand, you have people like Najil Ali, you have people like Morid al-Barghouti, you have people like to an extent, Edward Said, who were like the French intellectuals who didn't want to be part of the institution and play the same role of what they thought bring better results to Palestine. So Morid al-Barghouti is like Edward Said in that context. And not only he was critical of the political sphere in the Arab world, or the Palestinian Authority, or Hamas, but also against the stereotypes in society and in literature.
Now, remember, listeners, February is subscriber month. Make sure you call into 3CR, subscribe, $100 a year, or go to 3cr.org.au. Make sure you tell them that you listen intently every week to Palestine Remembered. Give us an extra plug in there. So 3cr.org.au, or call into the radio station. Make sure you subscribe. Now, Yusuf, why don't we have a couple more minutes on Morid, and then we want to catch up with you and what you're doing with Averroes and your upcoming event at the Wheeler Centre. So why don't you take us out with 2 more minutes on Morid?
I just want to say that the family of Morid al-Barghouti and Radwa Ashur is one of the jewels of the Palestinian society. Not that they were much different in their suffering, but because they were able to continue challenging the mainstream narrative, whether this narrative, the enemy narrative, which is the Zionist narrative, or the fake brothers narrative, like the Arab narrative, or even the Palestinian narrative. So they were able to continue this, and they were able to continue to improve even their literature. Morid says that "Ana aktub bil mimha," I write with the eraser, meaning that he is not satisfied and pleased of the level of his literature, and he keeps improving, and he keeps writing, and he keeps rewriting. And this spirit is not very common these days, unfortunately. And we have lost by the death of Morid somebody who was able to shed some light on a very tough terrain that's ahead of us. So all I can say to maybe in the last sentence is may Allah's mercy be upon his soul, and may his legacy remain forever.
Inshallah. Ali alhamd. Now, Yusuf, you've been very busy, even though you haven't been on the radio show, and our listeners text me and write to me how much they've missed you. But you've been working on the Avarua Centre of Arab Culture, and you've got an event coming up on the 4th of March. What can storytelling offer us in the dark times? And you've got a star-studded cast there, Professor Nadia Masood, Sabah Bakhrour, Dr. Colin McNaught, and yourself, Thursday, the 4th of March at 6:30 p.m. at the Wheeler Centre. Sounds very exciting.
Thank you, Nasser. Before I answer this, I want to say how much I dearly missed my listeners. And I feel that my physical disconnection from the show is not a real disconnection, because I always belong to the show. I will always be there, and I will always miss them. And again, I want to reiterate my gratitude to you, Nasser, for keeping the voice alive. Now, with the upcoming event, we may have spoken about Avarua Center, a center to promote knowledge about Arab culture that we named after the philosopher Averroes. Of course, yourself is a part of it since its inception. Now, everything came to a halt because of COVID last year, and I guess everybody was or could not wait for the lockdown to be over to resume life, and we were delighted to bring back the musical part. Probably was the most missed, faster than the other. We were able to perform some music gigs, maybe three or four of them. But I want to talk about the 4th of March, Thursday. And this is an invitation for our listeners. If you want to attend, please look up the following topic and do the booking online, because after COVID, everything has to be online for limited seating reasons. So the topic, like Nasser said, is what can storytelling offer us in the dark times? What can storytelling offer us in the dark times? And I'm pleased to also, Nasser, announce that in addition to the 3 speakers and our beloved MC, Professor Nadia Masood, we are delighted to announce that Dr. Caroline Briggs, Auntie Caroline, representatives from the Indigenous Voice, will be a speaker. She has given us her approval just today. So there will be 4 speakers, and what we are going to talk about is how societies, how humankind respond to calamities, whether it's ecology or environmental or political or any form of disaster. Songs and storytelling and literature and poetry and dancing. And of course, with experiences like Dr. Colin McNaught on Irish literature, how a small country like Ireland produced 4 Nobel Prize winners in literature, and of course, and somebody like Mr. Sabah Bakhrour, who is a walking encyclopedia from Iraq, who will talk to us about the Mesopotamian civilization, and Dr. Caroline Briggs will talk to us about, of course, the obvious dark times of the indigenous population of Australia. And myself, I will try and shed some light on the Palestinian journey. So come, and there will also be a little bit of music. Hope to see you there.
Fantastic. Now, what I'll do is I'll put a link to that in the podcast. So it's at the Wheeler Centre, ladies and gentlemen. So if you can either Google the Wheeler Centre and look for what can storytelling offer us in the dark times. It's Thursday, the 4th of March at 6:30 for a 7 o'clock start. It's only $20. The Avarua Centre of Arab Culture. Congratulations, Yusuf. I'll put that link in the podcast. If you can't find it, just go to 3cr.org.au, Palestine Remembered, and you'll be able to find that link, or go straight to the Wheeler Centre. Congratulations again, Yusuf, and great to speak to you, and God bless your soul, Morid, and inshallah we will speak and hear from you again soon.
Thank you so much, Nasser, and all the best to our dear listeners, and keep up your support to 3CR and keep the voice of Palestine heard around you. Thank you.
That was Yusuf. I'm sure you'll agree. Great to hear his voice again. Remember, subscribe, donate, and there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.